Afternoon. It's November the 8th, the end of quite a week. And we're a day later than usual for THCB Gang. I'm Matthew Holt, founder and publisher of the healthcare blog. And I was at the Behavioral Health Tech Conference, which was a bunch of because of its mental health care, a big crowd, a lot more swaying, a lot more female and liberal than the state of Arizona that we were in. And I'm going to tell you, Tuesday night and Wednesday were somewhat emotional days for obvious reasons. All right, THCB Gang is here. We have got Michael Millenson from Health Quality Advisors, long time healthcare quality and patient safety guy. Kim Bellard, the frequent THCB contributor, writer, occasional contributor. We've got him back now, Brian Klepper, who these days is hanging his hat at something called the Employers Clinic Commission, but we'll figure out what that's all about in a minute. And then our friend and colleague from the world of digital health investment, Steven Wardell from the Digital Health Investor Talk Show, and also Wardell Advisors. I hope I got everyone's name and title correct. But gents, we're all here. I don't know how we managed to avoid having any women, but I guess we are mirroring the country as a whole in that case, right? Awful but true, I'm afraid that joke is. Okay. So, uh, guys, we had an election. A certain guy won who perhaps we may not all have thought was one. And I would just have to say that, the world is an incredible place. You have a guy who spent the last 2 weeks, a woman with a professional campaign and great outreach to people in swing states and all that kind of stuff, with tailored messages for the Nikki Haley conservatives and the Cheney conservatives and particular things for young black males and whatever, managing to like sort of having no impact on moving the needle. Well, the guy who spent the last of his rallies just swaying to music on stage and jerking off two giraffes at the same time, apparently did what he needed to do to get the vote out. And um, I I. I'd love everyone's reaction to it, and I'm gonna have somebody like Kim tell me why he called this right in the first place. But you 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 let me know. So Kim, you always have something to say, so I'm going to start with you. What do you? But everyone can just dive in. Just give me some reactions. What do you expect? What did you? We'll talk about what happened first, and what we might expect in healthcare later. But let's start with this. What the hell happened, and what do you think's going on?
Well, first I have to say that I don't think I've had a real coherent thought since Tuesday night. So forgive me if I'm a little bit muddled today.
You're
But
not the only one.
yeah,
Right.
up till Tuesday evening, I kept telling myself that I did not think our country would reelect a person like that. I forgave the country in 16 because a lot of people were very unhappy. They didn't really know who he was, promised to change and so on. I was pleased in 20, even though it was, kind of too close. But I really thought that he was becoming clear who he was. People saw that would not accept him, and the sad thing is that people saw who he was and elected him anyway. So I'm struggling with what that says about us. We know who he is. He's the same as it's always been, but it says a lot more about the country than it does about us, and that concerns me a lot. To some extent, I'm worried that the price of eggs is more important to our country than the Constitution, and that's very dismaying, but not entirely surprising, unfortunately.
I mean, the other thing you have to remember, right, is really fine margins on this stuff. Now, even if he wins the popular vote, and we can talk about that in a second, we're talking, we've gone, from being 52, 49 or whatever it was, or 48 under but it was even when Obama won that big landslide in 2008, it was like 54 to 46 or something. We're talking about, and then Biden's big win was a few percentage points, and really those few percentage points have barely reversed back. But it's not like Reagan, was it Reagan got 58 or 60% of the electorate in 2000, in 84? Or it's not the electorate, but the voting public. And then you've also got to remember that, turnout of actual eligible voters, not registered, but eligible voters, has always sat below 60% in the US, in some cases down as low as 50%. And then it went up to like 65%, I think, for the 2020 election for some reason, and seems to have headed downwards this time, even though it's quite high in the swing states. about the same number in the swing states, and California hasn't.
The thing that
As
I
long as you
struggle
don't
with
count
is
it.
that so Trump didn't really get any more votes than he did last time. He's almost exactly where he was last time. She got, I mean, the final numbers aren't in yet, but she got 10 to 12 million fewer votes than Biden did. So it wasn't that he got more people, it's that she got less. And again, the Dems really need to think hard about that.
Well, or the alternative, is that Roger Stone was right, and there were 10 million fake votes last time. Oh, I shouldn't say
There's a lot of that going around, yes.
a lot of people saying, a
Well,
lot of people
the,
saying.
the, the
Anyway,
flip at that is, and I'm wondering, like, are there 10 million votes missing this time? Did the anti uh,
it,
Democrat things manage to steal a bunch of votes? I mean,
well, the only thing with saying that conspiracy theory stuff, right, is that last time the sitting president's party managed to, have 10 million votes fraudulently done against him, and this time the sitting president's party managed to. If it was the other way around, if the sitting president's party won by 10 million and weren't expecting to, then I go, then that looks like, the African election where mysteriously one tribe wins than the other. And but it's hard. It's very hard for me to see that level of sort of, fraud and corruption. There was some stuff going on in 2004 and 2000 with, electronic votings and the Russians hacking the system and yada, yada, yada. And your state of Ohio had some weird stuff back then. You remember there's a bunch of conspiracy theories about that. But I think the result is what the result is. And I saw a chart this morning, about who are in America, where they were comparing likelihood to vote for one or the other. And this is not a news story. Same thing happened under George W. Bush, right? Which is people's understanding of what was going on in America on a bunch of issues, including prices and inflation and immigration and employment. And the worst you thought, the less like you were to see what the actual objective truth was, the more likely you were to vote for for Trump, and the more likely you understood the
Yeah.
objective truth. The closer you are, it's like the old story. The NPR readers who actually understood, got the world quite accurate, were all voting for Kerry. The Fox News viewers who were, who were being fed Fox News in 2004 all voted for Bush. And now you take that and you put TikTok and X and Joe Rogan and whatever else, and you turbocharge the information, iconosphere, and the young people, especially on TikTok and in that echo chamber, sitting in their parents' basement, the harder it is. And you don't need to move, as Putin found out in 2016 in the UK. You don't need to move very much of the electorate. Just need to move a couple of points. Anyway, Michael, Brian, Stephen, you
So
go.
I want to build on that for a moment. Since I went door knocking for three Sundays in Wisconsin, and so I looked at the Wisconsin results, and out of three, and this has not been reported that much about the margin, out of 3.2 million votes, if 15,000 people had changed their vote from Trump to Harris, she would have won. 15,000 people changing their votes out of 3.2 million. And I think the point that you just made, Matthew, is an important one. Again, I've read all the conventional stuff, which is the Democrats have got to repeal better. All that is true, but nobody's talking about the misinformation, the lack of information. So there was a Reuters poll before the election that said 43% of the population consider themselves news avoiders. Okay. So that goes to the objective truth. So if you, in fact, are avoiding news and all you're seeing is targeted messages to you, and Trump's people for months, years have done the big lie technique, right? There was a sign that went up near us that said, "We may not be perfect, but we're not insane. Vote Republican." Well, I mean, whatever you might say about the Democrats, insane was not it. But he kept on saying, "They're insane. There goes your country." And so it becomes he said, she said to people who are not much consumers of news. So while everybody says, yes, they didn't do enough on the economy, they didn't know this, they did enough on that, and all that is true, what has not been said is that the same people who might have believed that would not have voted for Trump had they really known who he was. And I'm not convinced that they really did know who he was, that a lot of stuff wasn't drowned out. I mean, I talked to a voter in Wisconsin. I had a Marine Corps flag out front. I think he had a Trump thing. His biceps were big enough to have Semper Fi tattooed on them. And I said to him, I said, okay, I get you're supporting Trump, but here's what I understand. Here's a guy who calls John McCain a loser for being captured, who won't appear with a military veteran with an amputation because it makes him look bad. You know, how can you vote for this guy given, your military thing? And he's like, well, she's a career politician. The stuff about him I don't like. And I think that we shall see. But I think it's important to understand that the margins were thin and that not just even disinformation, but counter programming of I know you are, but so am I, which essentially was what he did, right? Time and time again works. If you look at his campaign thing, he's got Trump will fix it. Now, that, a friend of mine said he must have a magic button in the White House. You and I may laugh at that, but, we're not going back as sort of an obscure message. If you're a woman saying on the politics of joy is kind of not a strength message. And so, yes, it says something about who we are as a country. Yes, it's absolutely terrifying because the guy has not changed. And leaving aside any of his policy positions, he doesn't honor national security. He doesn't read. He doesn't go to the intelligence briefing. He has no right. I mean, all the personal characteristics that cause his former cabinet members to say he was a moron, and that was when he had more brain cells, right? So
And
all of that is scary, and you see Vance running the country and some of the crazies, and so I think it's scary. But I also think that the Democrats did not adapt to a campaign where those traditional sources of information and knowledge were overwhelmed. And if you talk to Trump voters, and then I'll shut up. If you looked at the guy who was killed at that Trump rally at the failed assassination, and he was very patriotic and all the rest of that, you have to ask yourself, how can we be so poor communicators that someone who says there was a peaceful transfer of power when police officers were killed is backed by and committed suicide, was backed by police union? How can we be such poor coordinators that somebody who makes fun of Purple Heart families has military support? And you have to say that's kind of due to not being able to effectively counter communication. It's not that people necessarily agree, but they end up seeing him as less bad, and it's terrifying. Last point, and then we'll talk about this during what's going to happen. Those people who say he's incompetent are whistling in the dark. He's got a lot more people who are more competent at doing a radical agenda to be under him this time than not, and they simply will be careful not to interrupt his TV watching and go and do their work. And so, policies notwithstanding, a misinformed, egotistical, narcissistic president of the United States is scary. And we shall see how long. I just heard an NPR on my way over that his chief of staff, Susan Wiles, is respected by Democrats and is a real professional pro and all the rest of that. We'll see how long she keeps the job.
I think her appointment and resignation might as well at the same time. But anyway, Brian.
I am utterly rattled by it. The American voters knowingly voted in a guy who says that he's going to suspend the Constitution and that he's going to do away with elections. And we appear not to take that seriously. So, I mean, I think that whatever he does in healthcare, whatever, but all of a sudden the concerns have become a lot more serious than just that.
I would, going back to the Bush era, you remember 2000, right? Where you were then a Florida man, Brian, and I know you've become much more intelligent in recent years and moved out, but everyone was kidding about Florida, and there was, minor elections to a degree because Susan Harris, the Secretary of State, wiped a bunch of people off the voter rolls. There was the screw up in Palm Beach County. There was the double voting on the ballot in Jacksonville, and all it looked like Gore actually won the state but lost it, and Gore won the election by 500,000 votes and lost it. And the Democrats tugged their forelock. They went to court. They lost at the Republicans to Supreme Court, right? And then they went, okay, well, we have to play nice. Very similar language to you're hearing now, right? From Biden. He won fair and square, will be good for the transition. Clearly not what happened with Trump, right? Trump, it did happen to George W. Bush, and obviously from Herbert Walker Bush to Clinton. There was a peaceful transition. It was all fine. We played by the rules. Clearly not what happened last time when Trump, tried to overturn the election in several different ways at the insurrection, blah, 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 blah. What the Republicans did then, and I'm talking 2001, is they appointed a set of cabinet ministers and they went after some aggressive positions in ways, you remember back then we were all complaining about John Ashcroft and what the Attorney General was doing, and, some of the extremists they put into various positions in the cabinet or what have you, and, and then obviously the march towards war as soon as 9/11 happened, yada, yada, yada. And if you look at what the Republicans have done ever since, I'm particularly thinking about the Senate and the screwing around with the Supreme Court, not having a hearing for Merrick Garland and sticking him on the Supreme Court, which would have been much better than where he's been the last 4 years as Attorney General, plus all the stuff that Trump did after what in any other country would have been a loss by 3 million votes in 2016, whether he wins or not, doesn't win the popular vote this time. All the stuff that Trump did and try to get going, in 2016 and may now try again, as you suggest, Michael, even more unfettered. The Democrats would never play that game. And Joe Biden could, have said, I'm going to play hardball. You guys messed with the Supreme Court. I can appoint 4 more to match the number of district courts and pack the court. I can do this. And then I can put my finger on the scale a little bit of the Justice Department and speed up these prosecutions that we know were going to happen anyway, right? Because at least one of them, there'd already been an impeachment about. It had failed, but the impeachment, basically, McConnell said, needs to go to prosecution. They sat there for 2 years and let Liz Cheney and the Democrats in the House, do the whole January 6th committee. And here we are, they're going to pull that case now, because we're going to run out of time. Same thing with the secrets trial. The New Yorkers, for a crime in which he'd already been an unindicted co-conspirator, in which Michael Cohen had already gone to jail. In my view, he should be out of jail now for the sentencing of that, the Stormy Daniels payoff. He should have gone and been out by now and could probably be running as like I was victimized and sent to jail the way Steve Bannon was, because, Cohen only served 2 years. So, but to me is that, the Democrats just will not, they won't play the hardball way that the Republicans will. They just won't do it. And, so you've got one team which is trying to play by the gentlemanly rules of cricket, and the other team which is, playing, I don't know what the game is they're playing, but it's not, it's not not beanbag or whatever they say about politics.
Right. Hey, Matthew, I have a suggestion that what Biden should do, given what the Supreme Court is, when Trump comes to the White House for the transition, he should have the Marine Corps guards arrest him and throw him in prison. Say it's an official act.
I mean, he can. I mean, yeah.
Right.
But you could still do some really shady stuff, right? You could do a bunch of if you could get the majority. The problem is obviously Biden struggled to get the senators on board,
right?
Especially with Sinema and Manchin. And the other thing that we should note, and then I'll shut up and I haven't given Stephen a chance to talk about this yet, is that interesting enough that the Senate map is realigning to kind of what you should rationally expect, which is that the last of the Democratic senators in Trump favoring states, not the margin, not the swing states, are all ticking over, right? So Ohio's gone over, West Virginia's gone over, Montana's gone. I don't think there is, with the exception perhaps of maybe, I can't think of a senator now from one of those states. If you go back,
Tammy Baldwin won in Wisconsin.
Yeah, but that's
a much lower margin. But why Ohio? You believe
states, they're all hanging on.
They'll hang on. But you believe Ohio is a Trump state?
Ohio's
It
a Trump
absolutely is a Trump state.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at it, he won what,
That's right.
55% of the vote in Ohio, something like that. Now, what do you know what was the number was in Ohio? Kim,
There
55?
there are no statewide Democrats
Yeah, left, right?
at all.
Really?
Yeah, they moved
Wow.
on.
I didn't know that.
And that's been Ohio's been trending that way for a while.
Wow.
As it's been getting older and poorer, basically. But what I'm saying there is that if you look at the map of America, you would expect there should be like a 60 vote built in, the Senate of the map of the Senate, just because of those small states, which have to. My daughter was doing a test today on the American Constitution, and yes, don't forget the Electoral College. You get number of senators plus number of representatives. And there are a couple of red states growing, obviously Florida and Texas are among them in that world, but those small states are overrepresented in the Electoral College and overrepresented in the Senate, and it's starting to go that way. So the Senate may eventually, what are they, 55 now? May eventually get to, if they have a good run, may eventually get to 60 again for the Republicans. But in
They're
general,
thinking they're not going to get to 60 this time.
they
Maybe
won't get to
50.
60 this time.
They're at 53 last I looked.
Yeah,
53?
53.
Don't they
Yeah.
have two more to come? Maybe. Is it 53, 47 now?
Well, has Casey been decided?
I want Casey.
He's refusing. It looks like he's losing, but he's refusing to concede.
Oh, so it'll be like Trump. It could be one of those ones. Remember Al Franken in Minnesota, where it took like 6 months for them to actually figure out who the hell won? It was like by 3 votes. I mean, yeah, there's that. Clearly, they're winning, but there's a natural realignment in the Senate, which is
There is.
gone, and then we have these swing states, right? And then we can't change or fix any of that. But it was notable that the senators in all those states, with the exception of Casey, but in Wisconsin. Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, and Michigan, the Democrat actually won, eked out a victory, where Harris just got beat, and he said it wasn't very many thousand votes either way. And there are a lot of people who voted for Trump who didn't vote for the state. It wasn't they switched, they just didn't vote. And the vote totals are lower for the senator, which leads me back to my other point, which I just mentioned about playing hardball, which is that what would have happened, you can't do the counterfactual analysis, it's too late, either if Trump was in jail and really was, they'd gone after him, if you or I stole those secrets, in 3 months, you're doing 40 years, right? The only reason that it didn't happen to him is that he's, and who knows what he sold to the Saudis or what cushioned him and whatever. So, had that happened, right? Had they thrown the book at him, or had he been banned from running, like the Brazilians did with Bolsonaro after his little minor insurrection compared to January the 6th, and is banned from running ever again? If that had happened, would the Republicans have held together around the MAGA coalition, or would it have fallen apart? Or for the matter, had the assassination attempt been successful, right? Had Trump not been there, would the cult start falling apart? And then you have to ask what happens in 2028 or 26.
Matthew, if it wasn't Trump, would Biden have continued to run? You have to do it the other way too.
I mean, look, and had counterfactual, had Biden said I'm a one-term president, or had Biden not had the cognitive decline, which was there clearly for all to see on that first debate, that they managed to sort of hide the next, all this, and had he run a proper primary, and Harris probably would have got beaten again, I guess, and my guess is Shapiro or Whitmer or somebody would have.
But
who knows?
by the way, Trump was able to vote for himself because I think he was convicted in.
He's convicted in New York, but not in Florida.
Right, but he could vote because Florida defers. He lives in Florida. They defer to New York law, which allows convicted felons to vote.
Florida allows convicted felons to vote now, so long as they paid their fines, but they didn't.
Right. So thanks to those weak-kneed liberals in New York who are soft on crime, he was allowed to vote.
But I don't think he needed the vote in.
I'm feeling bad for Steven. It's a half hour.
Yeah, sorry, Steven.
Yes.
Why haven't you, Steven? You're interrupting us. We're going to talk about healthcare and health tech in a second, but you should interrupt us and tell us what you think about this sorry mess sitting in Massachusetts.
Well, I actually was thinking of talking about the healthcare impacts of the election. But
is this a healthcare show? All of a sudden, what happened?
Like other people,
good transition. What do we think?
Like other people, I've done my share of doom scrolling and the last few days. So I guess what I wanted to maybe toss out there. So first of all, I think it's kind of hard to wrap your head around what a Trump administration means for healthcare. I don't think that he laid out plans during the specific campaigns for the next year or two during the campaign. But so I've been asking friends, and I came up with a couple of issues. I thought I would just name the issues now, and would love to get people's reactions, and we can maybe dive into any that we want to dive into. But one would be RFK, who is an environmental lawyer, but who seems to have be crosswise or be looking askance at the FDA, the CDC, and the Department of Health and Human Services. And I'm not sure why, and interestingly, RFK, the day after the election, made a statement where he moderated his tone on vaccines. So that was interesting. The second one is Elon Musk, who's not healthcare specific, but who is promising to cut regulation, as in words, and also cut bureaucracy, as in people. And so that may affect healthcare as well. The third is, this surprised me, I heard this a bunch from friends, is Lina Khan, the chairman of the FTC, has been blocking mergers. And this has finance people in every industry concerned, because there's two ways to exit a young company: by IPO or by M&A. And she was blocking big mergers, but apparently this had a trickle-down effect that's blocking small mergers. And so people think that that'll lead to more M&A. And then there's the topic of Obama's healthcare reform, which is the biggest healthcare issue of our lifetimes. And what Trump stood for in the past was blocking this shift to fee for value. And so he hasn't spoken about it. And I don't think the American people particularly want change. It's very emotional when you get changes here, but I don't see any particular direction. So Obama pushed healthcare reform, Trump froze it. Well, Biden chose not to make it a priority, to keep pushing it. And now it's Trump's ball again. So I don't know what happens there. And lastly, I think in the whole world, there's only one country that pays full price for innovation in healthcare, and that's the US. And that's been a bipartisan agreement to pay full price for innovation in the US. We saw some erosion of drug prices under the Inflation Reduction Act, maybe deserved. But will America continue to pay for innovation? I don't know. But those are 5 issues that I saw of this election. But I think there's also a blank space here, because we didn't see this. This was not a priority of either side to talk much about this during this past election, I think.
Yeah.
So other than RFK talking about vaccines.
Certainly gone under the radar. I would add 2 minor things. Under CMS, when Trump was in office, I wouldn't say he probably, guess he didn't personally even know about this, but the subsidies and care and support for people buying the exchange on the Affordable Care Act was definitely reduced, and the the number of people who were uninsured went up. And then the Inflation Reduction Act did actually have some money in it, which expires next year, to help people pay for the subsidies people buying on the exchange. So I think that is for sure under threat, and they may or may not get renewed. We should ask people about that. And then one thing you didn't mention, which is that it's likely that in Musk's, I want to cut people and bureaucracy, there's a lot of money that goes to Medicaid. And if you're prepared to go after him, then going after Medicare is one thing. Going after Medicaid tends to be quite easy. So I think that's a couple of things. But anyway, reactions from the rest of you lot to the 75 detailed and very good points that Stephen just raised.
Well, I had been
Stephen,
assuming that he would strangle
then Brian.
sort of what he tried to do before. He would strangle ACA through not funding it and so on.
Yeah.
I read an analysis this morning that if they don't do the continued extra subsidies that the Inflation Reduction Act did, so a bunch of people are going to get huge increases on their premiums, but it's going to fall disproportionately to rural counties and Trump voters. So they're going to have to think real carefully about, do they want to upset their own voters, or do they just want to settle that out? I have seen several things from the Republicans, not from Trump necessarily, but from several Republicans, that say that they want to move to a more health savings account kind of approach, where you give people money and they manage it. We're back to the healthy people do fine, the sick people do bad. So there is a risk of that, but I think they need to tread very carefully about undermining ACA too much, because their people are going to get hurt too. And the same applies to Medicaid. We think of it as a Democratic program, but there are a bunch of rural people on Medicaid.
Brian?
What I was going to say, Stephen, there's a a good piece from Axios that came out yesterday or day before that goes through all of these issues that you mentioned and talks about Trump and his allies' perspectives on it. They're big on beating up on the big insurance companies right now, and they're big on taking the PBMs to task. They've sort of acknowledged that the big health plans are not just health plans anymore. They're much more than that. They encompass the PBMs and you've got Optum and all of that. And so they in theory are okay with going after that sort of thing, but in general, the biggest impact that they hope to have immediately is this business with Musk wanting to take $2 trillion out of the budget, and he wants to do that by closing down Medicaid services, by taking money from Medicare, particularly Medicare Advantage, and we can expect there'll be a bunch of people who fall out of coverage from the rise in premiums that have gone on now, and they'll be just left to be adrift. I mean, so it's pretty draconian what they're talking about.
I mean, I wonder how easy it's going to be. You know, you can come along and say, "Oh, the federal government's $7 billion should be $5 billion, and I'm going to get rid of $2 trillion." You know, that's very, very hard to do, right? I mean, now you can fire a lot of people, you can cut a lot of services and programs, but unless you really want to go at the hardcore and do defense, Social Security, Medicare, and or become Argentina and stop paying interest on your debt because it only goes to those terrible Chinese people. They're the big categories. It's back to, I remember when Alan Morrison first met me at Institute for the Future, and they did a study on election night in 1994 in which Americans wanted to balance the budget by cutting foreign aid. And someone pointed out it was only 0.5% of the federal budget. But we're going to cut the hell out of we're going to screw those foreigners.
And fraud and abuse, right? In healthcare.
I mean, look, there is a lot of fraud and abuse in healthcare. We know that, but
but it's not at that level. And besides, isn't fraud and abuse part of Trump's brand?
He doesn't have a healthcare service thing. So otherwise, there would be no interest in cutting fraud and abuse in that.
The thing I'm cutting on with Elon is that he and Trump are the two thinnest skinned narcissists in the world. So as soon as Elon does something to take more credit than Trump is going to lash out at him, and Elon's going to lash back. I predict they will have a falling out before Inauguration Day. So that's my forecast.
I mean, don't forget, Elon and Peter Thiel have now sort of teamed up, and their guy is JD Vance, and there is that 25th Amendment when after he assembles a cabinet and they line them up. I mean, and Elon spreads around the money and and decides that it's time to have his guy in the White House directly. I mean, look, I've been saying for years that illegal immigration is immigration illegal and illegal is beneficial for legal and illegal is beneficial for America, and we're going to find out now because we have an illegal immigrant too, so that'll be very important in running the show. So allegedly he's legal now, but clearly he was illegal at one point. Anyway, Stephen, let's go back to your point about funding innovation in drugs, and I guess we can do a quick vote. The cuts to drug pricing, the only has been in the Inflation Reduction Act. Don't forget there was the extension of the of support for subsidies, and there was a whole bunch of stuff around clean energy, which Musk has said he wants to see go away, even though he would benefits from it. If that actually gets reversed, which is quite possible, those cuts to drug prices presumably go away. So I mean, maybe we stay where we were. But you're talking about how much are we prepared to pay for expensive drugs, and we still have the massive example of the cost of GLP-1s, which is the miracle drug that costs 15 grand or 10 to 15 grand a year, depending. Well, Brian, you probably know how much it costs for employers, but it's not cheap, right?
Right.
What's your sense, Stephen, about that part around innovation? You raised a question. What's your answer?
when I say that America is the only country that pays for innovation, what I mean is paying full price for drugs, obviously, also for medical devices, also, just innovative products, services, technologies, that sort of thing. And I don't see anything in Trump's plans that goes after that. I think, and so I haven't heard of reverse. So I think in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was a provision that allowed CMS and government bodies to negotiate farmer prices for the first time instead of taking, prices based on what other people charge in the market. And then that has caused anxiety in big pharma around weaker margins for them and led to staff cuts were attributed to it over the last year in pharma that I've been hearing about. I live in Boston, and we have a lot of biopharma, old pharma, biopharma here in Boston. But I don't necessarily see further cuts along there. What I would see, so way of thinking of the budget is the federal budget pays for federal employees, and then it also is transfer payments, and so or interest on the debt or something like that. And so I think they're going to go after employees. Why do I think that? Because Elon Musk is doing it, and he supposedly went into Twitter and cut 80% of Twitter employees. And so he's envisioning that somehow, due to email and due to cell phones and due to servers, the federal government will be able to do about what it did in the past with fewer employees. So that's where, but the transfer payments, whether that's that is more of a policy matter rather than an efficiency matter, I think. So that's kind of how I read the tea leaves. But so I do see Elon Musk coming in doing things like that. I don't necessarily see additional acts passing through Congress that undercut the ability of the system to pay for innovation in the form of drugs, medical devices, diagnostics, and other software innovations, that sort of thing.
So I have a confession about RFK Jr. So I've always thought of him as a pure nutcase, but I read an interview with him at the NPR, and it turns out that some of the stuff he says is not crazy. Like, I thought the fluoride thing.
Worm only got to some of his brain, is what you're saying.
Well, yeah. So like the fluoride thing, that seems like a nutty thing, but it turns out most of Europe has already banned fluoride in their water.
That's why we have teeth that look like mine.
Well, no, the argument is that if people are brushing their teeth with modern toothpaste, has fluoride in it, they get all the fluoride that they need.
They cut the study I saw is they cut the fluoride in the water in Alberta, Canada, and a bunch of cavities came back. So
I saw that, but there are other studies that show that there's no real difference. And again,
but it has always been a thing that fluoride is poisoning you. It's like putting lead. It's always been a crank conspiracy theory against it.
But why would you take it out? I mean, if you don't think it's poisoning you, why is this an issue?
Well, but fluoride does have potential health risks. And the question is, if we get enough fluoride in a toothpaste, why take the risk of getting it in the water too?
Because it's impossible to make your kids brush their teeth properly.
So
I mean, look. There is some stuff there, and I've been ranting on about. I mean, the idea about ultra processed food has got very wide credence. I mean, in amongst nutritionists and people experts in that area, and the fact that we have excess sugar and high fructose corn syrup. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement with that. There's a massive, massive lobby in the agricultural food lobby on keeping that the way it is, right? So I want to see them really, when they have to face down Cargill and Kellogg's and every other food company in America. Good luck, and the Agriculture Committee, right, which is a committee in the Senate guaranteed to try and keep promoting corn prices up. Good luck. We'll see how that goes. But I mean, saying that, I run it's okay to say that, but saying that, childhood vaccines are bad is just,
but he's not, again, in this interview, that's not what he said. He said, I'm not going to take vaccines away from anybody. He just wants people to have more information. But two other points. So to Steven's point,
we don't go back to what we said about more information.
What he said, why do we pay more for prescription drugs than everyone else in the world? And why are we one of the only two countries in the world that allows direct to consumer advertising? So again, I don't disagree with that. So that's not crazy. Right. He said that, so anybody think the FDA is really doing a good job moderating anything? He said there's a lot of conflicts of interest. There's a lot of payoffs and so on. Why do we still have subsidies for soybeans and corn? So there are things like that, some of these institutions have gotten co-opted by the industry, and that's not stupid.
I think we can agree there's a lot in there, right? And these are traditionally sort of far less crunchy granola positions. And the fact they're going to show up allegedly with him having some influence in a Republican government. But if you go back to what Trump was like last time, there wasn't really much, he was a bit wacky about some of this stuff, but he took the Republicans as a whole kept a fairly pro-corporate,
As you would expect.
as you expect, which is wacky given if you look at, now their support, the majority of of highly educated, people who run these corporations, well, not all of them, but many of them, are now voting Democratic, and the Republicans are getting a bigger share of the, working class vote, which traditionally would have been anti-corporate, back in the 30s and whatever.
Well, as with Elon, the good news is that RFK Jr. and Trump cannot coexist. As soon as RFK starts getting too many headlines, Trump will banish him the same way he did Steve Bannon. So he cannot tolerate the spotlight on anybody else.
We'll
Right.
see how long they last.
So I remember in the first Trump administration, what I thought one of the oddest parts of the first Trump administration was that Trump was famous for picking fights with people, and this could be picking fights with a celebrity and name calling and nasty stuff back and forth with a celebrity. And then he had an administration and he appointed people as administration. And then he started picking public fights, including on Twitter, with people in his administration. And that often signaled that they would be gone in a few. Well, you would think that they would keep it private and the person would simply leave. Instead, they would have a public fight for an indeterminate period of time. And then everyone was watching this, and people were shaking their heads and saying, why doesn't he fire him? Why? But almost as if the fight was a public entertainment of sorts. And the reason I bring that up is that I saw, like you, Kim, beforehand. I thought, here's these big personalities entering the Trump administration, and are they going to last more than a month? So maybe they're not going to last more than a month, but maybe there will be this odd public spectacle of RFK fighting with Trump and carrying out his own agenda at the CDC or something, with Trump publicly objecting but leaving him in place, which happened which was one of the oddest things in the last administration.
He doesn't fire people. That was a TV show.
I think he actually doesn't like. I think he doesn't like personal confrontation like that. I think
Exactly.
I would say one thing before I leave and lose the thread of innovation and payment for drugs. I'm always back to the fact that I was taught well in when I did my health services work at Stanford and health economics. You look at revenue for the big drug companies, and Kim raised this with, yes, a lot of it does go on R&D and innovation, about a third, but about 2/3 goes on marketing and sales. Now, I bring that up for the world of digital health, Stephen, because who had their results this morning? You look at this, Stephen, who came out with results this morning in digital health that did really well. There's only one very profitable company of all those IPOs in digital health.
Was this Hims and Hers?
They are slightly profitable and they're doing well because of GLP-1s. More profitable, double their market cap.
Not sure.
I've got him. I've outsmarted the digital health investor. Doximity, right?
Oh, yeah.
What is Doximity?
Oh, really?
Doximity is a doctor network which gives doctors lots of bells and whistles and reasons to look for jobs and whatever. How does it make its money? Makes its money by being a newfangled way for drug companies to market drugs to doctors, which they've done forever. Stock up 30% this morning. Stock has doubled over the course of the year. Revenues going straight up and to the right. But basically saying they found a newfangled way to do what they used to do by sending the hot blonde with the push-up bra and whatever into the into the doctor's office. What they're doing is the same stuff they've always done: is can we get our drug in front of the doctor with the goal of making them prescribe more of it? And I thought that was quite. If you went back for all the digital health stuff that all the five of us have been involved in, I don't know if we've lost Stephen or he's just got off camera for a second, have been involved with for all these decades, the only one that's doing really well is the one that figured out how to do detailing into doctors. It's just, I think, quite amusing. But well done, Jeff, tagging the folks at Dog Simply for figuring out how to make money when everyone else is losing their shirt. Anyway, all right. We have a few minutes. Stephen Clodley migrated us away from the just general whining about the election and Trump and all the rest of that stuff. I wonder how much, I mean, it's the speculation how much and how far it's going to go. I am interested in this sort of idea of that Brian raised about, what does Trump and his acolytes think about the big players, right? Are they just going to, I mean, if you look, the Medicare Advantage stock, United and Humana, started going up because they thought they would be left alone. Has to be said they've pretty much been left alone by the last three administrations. They kept on saying we're going to look at payments for Medicare Advantage and do something about it, but haven't really aggressively done it. They've had some court cases that they've lost or rulings they've lost. So, I'm wondering if you go into, and then Linda Khan, Stephen, I forgot when you were telling me that Linda Khan was going to stay or going to go, but she has made vague threats about coming off the hospital mergers, hasn't really done it. Brian, this is a topic you know a lot about. Vague threats about looking at what the hell the health plans are up to. And then somewhere in the bottom of this pile is a vague threat about the major technology vendor, Rode, run by a famed Democrat from Wisconsin, but Epic, right, and their role in the system. Do we think, perhaps I'll go to you first, Brian, but do we think might there be something there, or are they all going to be able to keep doing what they've been doing?
Oh, they'll keep on doing what they've been doing because they've got a willingness to pay off everybody in Congress, and everybody in Congress is more than glad to take the money. And so until we fix that problem, we won't make any headway.
You've only been telling me this since I met you in 1998 or whatever it was.
And he's right. That is practical health reform. I mean, take on United Healthcare. Do you think United Healthcare doesn't have Republican members of Congress who are going to defend them? I mean, to me, the epitome of how legislation is actually made is the Surprise Billing Act, right? Here was something that got widespread publicity, national publicity, scandals, people, all these kinds of things. And there was a huge popular wave. So they had to pass something. But rather than passing what you would think, given the public outrage, they passed something that carved out an exemption here, an exemption there, and led to lawsuits here and there. And so here you have something where the public spotlight is glaring, and you still basically see the lobbyists get their way. So now take that and go to other issues, which are far less interest, Medicaid eligibility or antitrust against large insurance companies or any of that in the weeds stuff that we think is fun, and ask yourself, who's gonna win those battles in the trenches? And I'll add one other thing for those who are too optimistic. Trump may not know where the hell the levers are, but this time around, the people who will be appointees do know where the levers are. And I will take you back to his first term when Tom Price was appointed Secretary of HHS. And Tom Price was a radical right-winger. And he came from one of the physician groups that really knew all the detailed kind of stuff of what they wanted to wreck. I mean, down to the kinds of things that really you'd have to be a wonk to know. And he was derailed because there was a public expose by, I believe it was KFF or Stat or ProPublica, one of those.
Dan Diamond, I think it's now Washington Post did it.
Right. Oh, Dan Diamond did. Right.
He went to the airport and saw his jet taken off.
Right. So Dan Diamond did a great report. He used to be with KFF Health News. And that caused him to resign. In a second Trump term, do you think somebody caught in that kind of scandal would be forced to resign or given a raise, right? And the second thing is Trump has already said that he can appoint people without Senate confirmation, the way the Democrats did with Don Berwick. So if you start appointing people with 2-year terms, which they can do without Senate confirmation, they don't have to worry about exposing their finances or their medical records or anything like that. And you take people who are zealots, they can do an enormous amount of damage because you can't expose everything. They're not the big issues. And you put those people in charge of Medicare or whatever. And you know, you can see a lot of radical before we came on, it's that DeSantis is pushing Dr. Joe Ladapo, the guy who's the Surgeon General of Florida, who is against vaccines, right, for
Oh, right.
Secretary of HHS. So you start doing that kind of thing, and you'll wish you had Tom Price, right? And so that's the real worry is, well, yeah, there'll be the spotlight on Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, some of the stuff. But when you get down to who's running or which agencies you're eliminating, you know, that can be a huge amount of damage. There's a saying, people are policy. And the people who will be serving in Trump administration #2, well, you have a pretty good guess what kind of policies they'll be in favor of.
I get
We
that.
have 11 weeks.
Yeah, well, I get that, but I mean, Brian's point is true, right? You do have a lot of the regulation, good or bad or whatever, has semi been written / designed with the current big incumbents in place in mind. You know, they've managed to it very, very well. And, you know, obviously the Medicare Advantage back and forth about the reverse audits going back years and how many fines should they have paid for upcoding, all that stuff has gone on forever. There's a bunch of lawsuits now about, now I know it's not about the star ratings that have gone in the plan's favor. I know it's not all, you know, it's not all necessarily great rules, like the idea that one phone call costing you $200 million because it got cut off early or whatever. So there's a bunch of stuff in there that's a little bit nuts. But my sense is that that's, you know, the hope, the quote of hope is, or the idea is that what might resist some sort of external craziness is the current incumbents saying we can't do it that way. But at some point, you know, they have as you said, they have the people running those agencies have got levers of power if they choose to use them. And I think that's probably one of the more interesting pieces going on for the next part. I would want to come back to Steven and ask him in the last few minutes we have. What I ran a panel of venture capitalists at this behavioral health tech conference, and I basically said, how can you lunatics be paying, can you be investing in growth therapy or Headway or Talkiatry, as they all had investors on the panel, you know, or other digital health, mental health companies, when you've got a big digital health company like Teladoc, which has got a huge mental health company, BetterHelp, stuck inside it, worth, you know, a third of what your valuations are with these private companies, you know, sitting there that some PE company could come and slice up and you know, have a bigger company with that. And there are a bunch of others, right? There are a bunch of other mental health companies that are stuck, they're publicly traded, like Talkspace. I have a photo of me in the same zip code as Michael Phelps from this conference. I couldn't get close enough to him to get a photo with him, but my kids are keen swimmers, and he was there with his man bun promoting Talkspace. There are a bunch of other companies, mental health companies within, say, Amwell, within, say, I know it's gone public now, but ShareCare, which, you know, you'd think it's cheaper to buy the public company than back the private company and wait for it to IPO and, you know, the higher valuation, all the rest of it. The response from the VCs was kind of what you expect. You know, our companies are growing faster. They're better attuned to the market than that first generation of mental health companies. They've figured out how to work with the incumbents, especially the big health plans, and to provide them something like and grow fast than the direct-to-consumer therapy companies are doing. And therefore, it's okay. And there was kind of a sort of hint that as has been happening, the current generation of publicly traded digital health companies will slowly be cleaned up and removed by private equity, as has slowly been happening, and that they'll get them out of the way, and then we'll get back to, you know, the good times of IPOs, and it'll be fine. And that part of the market will catch up to the rest of the stock market, which is still going balls to the walls crazy. So, Stephen, putting you on the spot as the investor guy in digital health, is that true? Are we going to see all these companies escape, get to IPO, go out, do well? It's all going to be, and the VCs will all be happy again, or do we, or is it not looking that good?
Well, there's a couple things in there. The first is that the old way of viewing these companies was that there was an automatic premium to any public company. There was a belief that a public company is going to be bigger than a private company. It's going to have better management. It's going to have more transparency. It's going to have stock market discipline. To get public in the first place, it would have needed to have been a market leader, et cetera. And therefore, public companies automatically got a valuation premium. We've been living through strange times where for years and years, on and off, there's been an inversion of these valuations, and this causes all kinds of issues and problems. Because in the old days, private companies would base their value off of public company valuations, where many participants were valuing it every second of every day. So that was considered to be truth. And therefore, private companies would know what they were worth by being worth 85% of what a public company was worth, or something like that. And now we don't know, because the private companies are illiquid. They were valued years ago. We don't know what the valuation is. And there was a stat that with B2B and B2C companies, this difference of private companies being valued highly and public companies being valued lowly was the greatest it's ever been right now. So it's a mess. Private companies can't look to public markets to figure out what they're worth. Or if they do, then it means they're worth a lot less than they would like to be worth right now. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that there's a belief we're going to see the IPO window open. We'll see some companies go out, but also that this is a sector that for 15 plus years, it should have seen regular shakeouts and consolidations, and it didn't see regular shakeouts and consolidations. And it should have seen that because we didn't see that because of the Fed's ZIRP policy, the zero interest rate policy, where for a young management team, it was always a better deal to go get a next round at a high valuation rather than shut down the company or sell at that moment. And so what we're seeing is, and now we've had a tough fundraising environment for 2 years or longer. There's only so long private companies can go without raising funding in a tough fundraising environment. And so we're expecting to see the mother of all shakeouts and consolidations. And so many companies that don't have good fundamentals are going to shut down. And that's been happening quietly. A bunch of that has happened. And then you'll also see, for those companies that are valuable, you'll see many be acquired, and it'll probably be a buyer's market for the acquisition. So that's bad. So both of those are bad for venture investors. To have your company shut down is bad, and to be sold in a buyer's market to a consolidator is bad for venture investors. So really tough. I've heard some discussion among entrepreneurs who have interests in companies, have been those companies for 5-10 years in digital health, don't see an easy path to a good exit, and they feel like they've missed out on 2 years of the AI revolution in healthcare or outside of healthcare, and they're wondering if they should just sort of throw in the towel on a whole generation of digital health companies and go join the AI revolution, because there's known markets where you build companies in healthcare, and the next thing to happen is every one of those is going to get an AI-based company in them, and then you'll have the incumbent, you'll have the digital health company that was started 8 years ago but is not native AI, and then suddenly you'll have an AI company in that competing with them, and these entrepreneurs would rather be the 2-year-old AI company were competing with them than the 8 or 10-year-old digital health company that was not sort of born AI native. So is that what you were looking for, Matthew?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I was thinking of a shake.
Funnily enough, on that panel, I had Daisy Wolf, who's partner at Andreessen, and that she banged on that AI number quite a bit. And there are a couple of, and she said something interesting, which was that one of them, she was talking about Hippocrates AI, or as I call it, Hippocratic AI, because I'm not a big fan of the CEO, but which is selling essentially NVIDIA-based avatar nurse advisors, but they're selling them as labor. It's an hourly rate, so you can hire them instead of a nurse. So that it doesn't hit the technology capital budget, which is quite interesting.
Huh.
There are also, but just a counterpoint against what you said, there's been a lot of investment lately in certain companies. Some of these number rounds are coming up again. We've seen some $100 million rounds and what have you in various sectors, and include mental health, but also in other in virtual clinics like the Mavens of the world, who raised a big round. Digital health, psychiatric, mental health companies like Talkartry raised money from Andreessen earlier this, I think, 100 million plus round. Earlier this year, Headway got a valuation of 3 billion. This year, we're not talking about companies that got funded in the craziness of 21 and 22. but people, so and we've seen one very big exit, which didn't really get a lot of mention, which is Caringbridge, bought by Elements, bought by Blue, Anthem Blue Cross, which was a sort of direct to home telehealth for the disabled Medicaid population. Went for $3 billion. Not having grown super fast and done really well, and again being part of the Bill Frist, Brad Smith empire. So there are a couple of exits, and you can get some pretty good exits back to the big incumbents. A la, I think United will get its checkbook out again pretty soon, and I think once they deal with the Change Healthcare stuff and that fuss stands down, I think there's some more to come here. I am still a little, I'm still going. It's going to be hard to see a really good IPO market till we get kind of Teladoc and some of those others, Amwell, some of those ones who are sitting around. I've got a list somewhere I put one out about Doximity. They're a 10 billion market cap. There's a whole stack of companies at 3, 4, 500 million, just $1 billion market cap who are, who've been sitting there for a long time, way, way off their peaks of 2 years ago and not really recovering. So, I think there's a lot to be seen, and what will be the harbinger of all this is we have, is it just 2, I think, S1s out now? Hinge and sorry, who's the other one? Blanking.
I looked. They've made announcements, but they have not actually filed their S1s, as far as I can tell, on Edgar.
So I mean, I think
there's a joke, by the way, that when they actually file their S1s, we should do shows like this and read them aloud while drinking.
That's a great. We'll do it. THC began with drinks and the Armada S1 going. It's been 15 years, really, and you're still losing how much, whatever. So we'll find out anyway. Well, I think that's an interesting, sort of concept of. There's a lot of uncertainty about that new technology investment, and as we said before, that kind of connects to the uncertainty around what's the policy environment going to be. Both on the on the sort of Medicare Advantage side and the Medicaid side, because a lot of these companies are still trying to sell, and now not all of them, but are trying to deliver services to the incumbents. More and more people are pulling out of direct to employer and going back to health plans. So you take a company like Brightline, which officially did this. It stopped kids mental health company, stopped trying to sell to employers and is now delivery, a health plan only provider and trying to build their own sort of medical group. I think people are going to be trying to figure out what are those big guys going to be buying, and that's going to, it's always been the issue, and they're obviously going to be highly influenced by whatever comes out of the out of CMS starting next year, and that's going to be, as we said, we don't know who the hell's going to do that. So interesting, man. All right, well we've talked about a lot here on the gang this afternoon. Let's have a quick go round and do take everyone's temperature and see how they're feeling and what's their big prediction for who's going to be doing the people and the policies about what's going to be coming next. Michael, can I start with you to wrap it up?
Yeah, I'm thinking whether ChatGPT gets appointed to the cabinet to work under Musk, but
well, no, it'll be his one is called Grok.
Oh, Grok, yes,
You're a Robert Heinlein fan, as we all
I think it's going to be a really, really rough policy ride, because imagine that you're a career employee at any of the HH. I'm not even going to go into the other agencies, the Army and everything happening there, but you're a career employee at HHS, and there is no political appointee yet because nobody's been confirmed, and you're acting director of whatever. But that the guys at top have these policy priorities that maybe you don't agree with. What are you going to do? People looking, to jump out. So I think it's going to be a very, very rough ride when you go from campaigning to governing. And of course, none of that takes into account whether all of our nice healthcare priorities are going to be superseded by some sort of foreign crisis or economic crisis or anything like that. So it's going to be a roller coaster ride. Unfortunately, it also gives an opportunity to people who want to make mischief deep within the bowels of an agency where the spotlight isn't, to go and do what they want. So we'll have some inertia, and then we'll have some bad things happen, I think. But we shall see. I think Brian's insights as to Congress will be more and more important, because if you have a powerful member of the Senate defending your interests, that could help a lot. So we shall see, but I think it's going to be a really roller coaster ride.
All right.
Yeah.
Go to you next, Brian.
I think that we are about to experience more turmoil in the employer sector with their healthcare costs, where finally a bunch of people fall out of the system.
Huh.
Now, I've been saying that for 30 years, and so have you. And but if we're talking about, McKinsey just said 9 to 10% increases per year in 2024, 5, and 6, which is 2 to 3 times the growth that we've had in the 4 years previous to that. And a bunch of employers are going to fall out from that because they don't have the money they've had supply chain problems and inflation problems like everybody else, and they don't have that additional money. So they're going to fall out, and that's going to put a lot of strain on the system, on what happens next, since that's 170 million people that are covered through that system.
Interesting. I agree. Steven, your final comments.
Yeah, so I'll raise a new topic, which is that I've been following.
You didn't have enough trouble already in this. Oh God.
So I've been following the receptivity of the FDA to novel technology, say over the last, call it 10 years. And this is new kinds of software, new kinds of data, new kinds of devices that might be more consumer type devices rather than old medical type devices that send data off of them into a central repository, use of that data. And I think if you started 10 or 5 years ago, people would have said the FDA was so conservative, it would be a blocker on these kinds of technologies. And it hasn't been. The FDA has been surprisingly open, surprisingly flexible. So groups like, with software as a medical device, I mean, who would have thought the FDA would have been quite receptive to pure software prescription digital therapeutics? The problem has been these haven't made a whole lot of money on the other end. And right now, prescription digital therapeutics are in a sort of a nuclear winter. But the FDA hasn't been the problem. It's been very open to doing things new ways, accepting new kinds of data, that sort of thing. And so I'm going to predict more of the same. You're going to have the influence of this group of technologists, which includes Elon Musk, but also possibly David Sachs and others, who will be sort of rooting for AI in healthcare and more use of novel kinds of software, novel kinds of data, novel ways to use it in healthcare and get it. And the FDA will continue to be receptive, as it has been for more than for over 5 years. So unexpectedly receptive. And I hearken back to, there was a famous bureaucrat who was proud that he never approved a drug in his 30-year career at the FDA. I forget his name, but he's held up by some as an example of what's wrong with the FDA. We haven't seen that in digital health with the FDA. So, and I think we'll see more of that, more of FDA sort of being open to this kind of change. So
wait, I want you to predict that Rob Califf is going to leave government and go to work for Elon Musk.
Could be at any moment. Kim.
Well, the thing I will predict about the policy is that the rich people and the big corporations are going to do just fine. As usual, it's going to be the poor people, the disabled people, the people that are sick. They are going to get left behind, and at some point, that's going to crack. Going on the larger scale, I don't know that I think the Democratic Party or the Republican Party meets the needs of most Americans anymore. And if there's ever a time for a third party, this may be it.
Oh, revolution.
Look at Bernie Sanders scathing
Yeah.
about the Democratic Party, and he's right on.
To be maybe true, he was one of the few Democratic senators who underperformed Kamala Harris in his state. Admittedly, it wasn't like 65% or whatever he gets. I'm gonna leave harking back to something that Brian just mentioned, was that everything in healthcare that's going to come is going to be subsidiary and down the path, right? So on the one hand, as Michael says, that means that people get into the works and do a lot of stuff that causes a lot of wonky damage, a wonky change and may not get much noticed. On the other hand, it is also, as Brian mentioned, subsidiary to, bigger factors. And if costs are going to continue to go up and the economy doesn't do as well, because we are due a recession at some point, somehow between Powell and Biden, they've managed to get us through, getting rid of inflation, but not increasing unemployment. But that miracle may not last much longer. And I'm looking at what were the two things that, if you could call it a policy agenda? I mean, Kamala Harris had a policy for everybody. As far as I can tell, Trump only had two, right? One is we're going to do tariffs on Chinese goods and put up a whole bunch of stuff in, really go after imports. And then the other one was we're going to deport 11 million illegal aliens. And if there are 11 million illegal aliens who are doing something, a ton of them are working in healthcare. They're not very nice roles in healthcare. They're also working in construction and agriculture and elsewhere. And when you disrupt the supply chain of labor to that extent, and it's not like we're going to replace them with, I mean, if that really happens, it won't only be in sort of, nice upper income Californians like myself finding their housekeeper has disappeared, but there's going to be a lot of parts of the system where things start falling apart, which can only lead to labor shortages, chaos, and therefore more inflation. And the tariffs, if they're enacted, are going to by definition lead to more inflation. I mean, the people who've been coming out saying, well, we thought, having been sat down by their employers saying, now you guys all voted for this, let me tell you, we're having no Christmas bonuses because we have to buy all the stuff now before the tariffs come in. Going, hang on, but we thought the Chinese would be paying the tariffs. It's like the Mexicans playing for the war. Just don't get it, right? And I don't know both those two things have got to get past corporate America, which is going to go, we can't afford. The supply chain is so intensely international that, nobody can afford a 20, 30, 40, 60, 80% tariff bump. And there are so many, maybe they can, so many legal and illegal.
Matthew, before we came on, I saw a comment by someone from the American Medical Manufacturers Association who said, yes, our costs will go up, but sometimes to do big things and have big change, you have to tolerate that kind of thing. So the question is, to what extent, I don't disagree with you, to what extent will corporate America go with the flow, and to what extent will they block him? I'm sure there'll be some of the latter, but some of the former, you never know.
He's not going to deport 10 million people. It's not going to happen.
No, not that. I'm talking some of the tariffs.
If you want to, you could. I guarantee you, I see enough people at Trump rallies who could be deputized to become INS special, immigration special inspectors. If you wanted to go after, and you start stopping everybody with a Hispanic look or brown skin or black skin, in many parts of this country, you were prepared to build the camps and prepared to do what it took. You could do it. I'm not saying it's great, but many times they've said they wanted to do it. Right? They were at the Republican National Convention waving signs saying mass deportation now. This was not targeted strikes.
When you press them on it, they say, well, we'll go after the criminals first. It's like, well, that's what they do now.
They're all criminals because they all enter the country illegally. Don't you know that? All right. I think the knock-on, if those things happen at whatever scale, the knock-on effects in the rest of the system are going to be quite bad. I mean, I live with two, as some of you know, I live with two young adult Hispanics, and my advice to them is they got to start carrying their green cards and immigration details with them straight away on January the 20th, and have a lawyer on speed dial, and hope that their nice white immigrant guardian doesn't get put in the camps with them, which I've told my kids that I poisoned their blood enough times by now. But anyway, all right, okay, we've gone over here a great post-election, even not a great post-election, a great post-election show of the THCB gang. I will just put the chart up again and thank my guests who were Michael Millenson from the Obama heartland of Chicago, and now a place where Pritzker says you have to come over me to get to it or something. Kim Bellard from the formerly swing state and now deep red world of Ohio. Anyhow. Brian Klepper from the even deeper red state of South Carolina these days. having left the hellscape that was Florida. And Steve Wardell, the only sensible guy like me in a very blue state in Boston. This is Matthew Holt from the Marin County, where we only went 85% for the Democrat instead of 90% this time. Although turnout was apparently less than 50% here because we knew who was going to win in California. That is the end of THCB Gang for this week. I'll be back next week on Thursday as regular, where we'll, I guess, have some more prognostication about what is going to happen next. But meanwhile, thank you for listening, and look forward to seeing everyone as the next week or so of what the hell happens in America and the rest of the world starts to develop.